The first sign wasn't an explosion. It wasn't an alien fleet appearing above Earth's skies, or a panicked distress call from the edge of the solar system. It was silence. The kind of silence that made scientists stop speaking in the middle of sentences, made military commanders forget the next words in their briefings, and made millions of ordinary people stare at frozen screens without understanding why their hearts had suddenly begun to race. At precisely 9:17 Universal Time Coordinated, every electronic display connected to any communication network, phones, satellites, hospital monitors, deep space observatories, orbital stations, even ancient backup terminals preserved in museums, went dark for exactly 3 seconds. No alarm sounded. No systems failed. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Then, as if guided by a single unseen hand, every screen awakened together. Across the planet, the same message appeared in perfect synchronization. Submit within 72 hours, or your civilization will be erased. There was no translation delay. No encrypted transmission. Every human being, regardless of language, read the sentence as though it had been written in their native tongue. The words were accompanied by an unfamiliar emblem suspended above them, a circle of 7 luminous stars surrounding a black center that seemed to absorb light itself. It was beautiful. Ancient. Terrifying. Looking directly at it left many viewers with an uneasy sensation, as if the symbol wasn't merely being displayed, but quietly observing whoever dared stare back. Within seconds, Earth's communication networks erupted into chaos. Emergency broadcasts interrupted entertainment channels. Air traffic control temporarily halted departures. Financial markets froze as automated trading systems abandoned every operation to analyze the impossible transmission. Social media exploded with billions of desperate questions. Was it a cyber attack? A sophisticated prank? The beginning of an invasion? Nobody knew. But every attempt to trace the source ended the same way. There wasn't one. The signal hadn't traveled through satellites, fiber optics, quantum relays, or radio frequencies. According to every sensor on Earth, it had simply appeared. Thousands of kilometers above the surface, aboard the orbital defense station Aegis 1, Commander Elias Ward watched technicians race between holographic consoles while streams of impossible data flooded every display. Nothing about the event followed the laws of known communication physics. There was no measurable energy signature. No identifiable carrier wave. It was as though reality itself had delivered the message directly into every machine humanity had ever built. Find the origin, Ward ordered, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. We're trying, sir, one analyst answered without looking away from her station. But there isn't an origin. Every sensor agrees. The message exists, but it was never transmitted. The room fell silent. Ward turned toward the observation window overlooking Earth. Beneath him, the blue planet rotated peacefully through the darkness, oceans reflecting sunlight with breathtaking beauty, utterly unaware that history had just changed forever. Somewhere below, billions of people were looking up at the same sky, searching for enemies they could not see. Parents hurried home to their children. Governments sealed underground command centers. Religious leaders called for prayer. Scientists demanded more data. Soldiers checked weapons they secretly feared would be useless against whatever intelligence had crossed an impossible distance simply to deliver a threat. Then another detail arrived. Long-range observatories monitoring deep space reported something impossible. Beyond the outer boundary of the solar system, where only darkness should exist, hundreds of faint gravitational distortions had begun to shimmer into existence. They weren't ships. Not yet. They were gateways. Massive ones. Silent tears in spacetime opening with terrifying precision. Someone, or something, was already on the way. And the 72-hour countdown had already begun. Humanity had spent generations convincing the galaxy that it was ordinary. To outsiders, Earth looked like a peaceful young civilization, technologically capable, diplomatically polite, and surprisingly cautious. Its ambassadors rarely argued in interstellar assemblies. Its exploration fleets avoided territorial disputes. Its trade ships carried medical technology, fusion components, and agricultural systems instead of weapons. Many alien observers quietly dismissed humans as clever engineers with little appetite for power. It was exactly the image Earth had wanted them to believe. Hidden behind decades of humility was a civilization that had quietly prepared for the one question every advanced species eventually faced: what happens when peace is no longer enough? Deep beyond the mapped borders of civilized space, where no commercial routes existed and even the stars seemed forgotten, drifted a rogue planet invisible to conventional scanners. The world had no sun to warm its frozen surface. Eternal darkness covered mountains of black ice, broken only by rivers of molten energy flowing beneath the crust. Buried inside that silent giant was Bastion Prime, the most heavily protected military installation humanity had ever constructed. Entire cities existed beneath kilometers of reinforced rock. Endless corridors glowed with cool white light while enormous reactor chambers pulsed with controlled artificial stars, producing enough energy to power fleets that the galaxy believed did not exist. At the heart of Bastion Prime stood Admiral Elena Cross. She watched the Council's ultimatum replay across a towering holographic display without blinking. Around her, hundreds of officers worked in disciplined silence. No shouting. No panic. Every movement carried the calm precision of people executing plans rehearsed for decades. Massive tactical maps floated in the air, projecting thousands of star systems connected by shimmering quantum routes. Red markers slowly appeared across the display, representing gravitational anomalies detected near the solar system. The invasion had not yet begun, but its shadow had already reached humanity. Cross folded her hands behind her back. So, she whispered, almost to herself, they finally came. There was no fear in her voice. Only confirmation. For nearly 40 years she had commanded the Deep Horizon Fleet, a force whose existence remained classified even from most of Earth's governments. Every officer standing beside her had dedicated an entire lifetime preparing for an enemy they had never seen. Many had wondered if those preparations would ever matter. Now the answer stood before them, glowing across every screen in the command chamber. A young intelligence officer stepped forward, his expression tense. Admiral, the Council has issued the same threat to every human settlement. Civilian leadership is requesting immediate recommendations. Cross remained silent for several seconds. She remembered the words of her predecessor, spoken long before she accepted command. Hope for friendship. Build for survival. Humanity had followed both instructions. While alien civilizations competed for political influence, Earth's greatest scientists disappeared into projects hidden beyond ordinary space. They learned to harvest energy from collapsing neutron stars. They mastered quantum computation decades ahead of public knowledge. Shipyards were carved inside the event horizons of engineered gravitational wells, where impossible manufacturing techniques turned raw matter into fleets faster than any rival civilization could imagine. Entire generations had sacrificed recognition so future generations would never have to kneel before a superior force. The galaxy had mistaken restraint for weakness. It was a mistake civilizations rarely survived. A soft chime echoed through the command center as encrypted reports poured in from every corner of human space. Lunar defense grids activated without public announcement. Mars synchronized its orbital shields. Hidden listening stations awakened beyond Pluto. Fleets that officially did not exist began leaving dark harbors concealed inside drifting asteroids, their engines illuminating the void with silent blue light before disappearing into hyperspace. No speeches were given. No declarations of war were broadcast. Earth moved with the quiet confidence of a civilization executing a plan written generations before anyone alive had been born. Admiral Cross looked one final time at the threatening message hanging above the command floor. Then she gave the order every officer had waited their entire career to hear. Initiate Protocol Dawn. Across Bastion Prime, thousands of lights shifted from white to crimson. Humanity had stopped preparing. Now, it was ready. The Galactic Council had witnessed the fall of countless civilizations, and every conquest had followed the same predictable pattern. A threat was issued. Panic spread. Leaders argued. World surrendered. Earth's silence fit perfectly into that familiar script. Inside the Council's immense chamber, a structure so vast that entire starships could have floated beneath its crystalline ceiling, representatives from hundreds of species watched the 72-hour countdown continue without receiving a single official reply from humanity. Murmurs echoed through the circular hall. Some interpreted the silence as fear. Others called it denial. A few, the oldest among them, exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something about this young species felt wrong. Supreme Marshal Kareth, commander of the Council's unified expeditionary fleet, had no such doubts. Standing nearly 4 meters tall beneath armor forged from living metal, he stared at the holographic projection of the solar system with absolute confidence. Around him floated tactical displays showing the largest military force assembled in over 1,000 years. More than 12,000 capital warships held formation beyond the edge of human space. Millions of autonomous strike drones drifted silently between them like schools of metallic predators. Planet Cracker siege platforms unfolded kilometer-wide gravity cannons capable of splitting continents apart without ever entering orbit. To Kareth, the campaign had already been won. The only question was how much of Earth would remain after the lesson was complete. Across neighboring systems, fear spread faster than light. Merchant convoys abandoned their routes, leaving trade corridors eerily empty. Neutral colonies sealed their orbital ports and powered down beacon networks, hoping invisibility would spare them from collateral destruction. Refugee fleets fled toward distant sectors, carrying families who had never even seen a human but had heard enough stories to know that wars involving the Council rarely ended cleanly. Entire civilizations watched from behind defensive shields, praying that Earth would surrender before the first shot condemned billions of innocent lives. Back in the solar system, every telescope, deep space array, and quantum observatory focused on the darkness beyond Pluto. At first, the approaching armada was invisible. Then the stars began to disappear. Tiny points of light blinked out one after another, not because they were dying, but because something unimaginably massive was passing between them and Earth. Gravitational sensors screamed with readings no natural phenomenon could produce. Space itself rippled like disturbed water as colossal hyperspace corridors slowly unfolded across the void. The distortions stretched for thousands of kilometers, shimmering with ghostly blue light that danced across the blackness. They weren't explosions. They were doors, gateways large enough for entire fleets to emerge side by side. On Earth, people gathered anywhere they could see the sky. Families stood together on rooftops despite government advisories. Children clutched their parents' hands without fully understanding why the adults remained so unusually quiet. Astronomers pointed trembling fingers toward impossible lights moving beyond the planets. News anchors struggled to keep steady voices as live feeds from orbital observatories filled every screen. Even seasoned astronauts aboard lunar stations found themselves staring into the void longer than duty required, searching for reassurance that never came. Inside Bastion Prime, however, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Rows of officers monitored the incoming fleet with disciplined focus. Every new gravitational anomaly was catalogued. Every enemy formation was identified. Every tactical projection updated in real time. Admiral Elena Cross moved through the command center without haste, occasionally stopping beside analysts to review data before continuing in complete silence. To an outside observer, it would have seemed impossible that the greatest invasion in recorded history was only hours away. There were no frantic orders. No desperate improvisation. Only preparation. Then the classified countdown reached its next phase. Across hundreds of secure military displays, hidden beneath layers of encryption invisible to civilian networks, a single line of text appeared simultaneously. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting enemy commitment. Several younger officers exchanged puzzled looks. They had expected emergency mobilization orders, not patient observation. Admiral Cross noticed their uncertainty. Without taking her eyes off the tactical map, she spoke quietly. They believe they're surrounding us. She paused as the hologram revealed another wave of Council fleets entering formation around the solar system. They don't realize. Her words hung in the stillness. They've just moved exactly where we wanted them. The final second of the Council's 72-hour ultimatum slipped away in absolute silence. Across Earth, billions waited for the first sign of annihilation. Military crews gripped their stations. Children hid beside frightened parents. Astronomers watched enormous gravitational gateways pulse beyond the outer planets, expecting the invasion to begin at any moment. Instead, every communication array in human space activated simultaneously. A single transmission left Earth, not encrypted, not disguised, but broadcast openly across every known frequency, every quantum relay, and every diplomatic channel connected to the Galactic Council. There was no declaration of war. No plea for mercy. Only a beautifully formatted digital letter, written with the elegance of an old handwritten note and translated flawlessly into every known language in the galaxy. It contained just 3 words. Thank you sincerely. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Inside the Galactic Council's central chamber, confusion spread like a physical force. Delegates stared at one another, convinced a translation error had occurred. Linguistic AIs verified the message. Cultural databases confirmed its meaning. The wording carried genuine gratitude, formal, respectful, unmistakable. It made no sense. Supreme Marshal Kareth narrowed his eyes, convinced humanity was attempting psychological warfare. Around him, military advisors began proposing immediate orbital bombardment before further delays complicated the campaign. Then warning lights erupted across the command floor. Not one. Hundreds. Every strategic display shifted from blue to crimson as emergency alerts flooded the chamber faster than operators could silence them. Marshal, one technician shouted, panic cracking his voice. We're receiving unauthorized authentication requests across the defense network. Karetha's expression hardened. Block them. We're trying. The operator's hands raced across holographic controls. They're already inside. The chamber fell silent. Across the galaxy, military relays began reporting the same impossible event. Autonomous defense grids acknowledged a new command authority. Deep space communication hubs rerouted priority access without requesting authorization. Orbital fortresses accepted encrypted instructions bearing the highest emergency clearance ever created by the Council itself. No hacking signatures existed. No malicious software. No hostile transmissions. According to every diagnostic system, the new commands were perfectly legitimate. Far beneath Bastion Prime, inside a chamber few humans even knew existed, thousands of quantum processors glowed with brilliant blue light. The machines filled an underground cavern the size of a city, suspended within magnetic fields so powerful they bent beams of light around them. Streams of incomprehensible calculations flowed between crystalline cores at nearly the speed of causality itself. Engineers watched silently as decades of preparation reached their conclusion. Dr. Maya Ishikawa, the architect of Project Sci-Fi, allowed herself the smallest smile. It worked. No cheers followed. Only quiet disbelief. 42 years earlier, humanity's cryptographers had discovered a theoretical flaw buried inside ancient Council emergency protocols. Every civilization received the same security architecture, but the encryption protecting it was considered mathematically impossible to break within any useful time frame. Even supercomputers required centuries to solve a single master key. The Council had never imagined another species would invent an entirely different form of computation. Nor had they imagined they would voluntarily deliver the missing authentication sequence themselves. The threat message. It hadn't merely been a warning. Embedded invisibly within its quantum signature was the Council's highest-level emergency verification code, automatically attached to every civilization-ending ultimatum to ensure military coordination between fleets. It was a safeguard no one questioned because no one believed it could ever be exploited. Humanity hadn't intercepted the key. The Council had handed it over willingly. All Earth needed was enough time to solve it. 72 hours. Exactly the amount required. Back inside the Council chamber, strategic maps transformed before horrified eyes. Thousands of warships flashed from green to amber as command hierarchies shifted. Planetary defense arrays paused mid-targeting sequence. Automated fleets requested confirmation from a command authority that now appeared to originate from Earth. Supreme Marshal Kareth stared at the tactical display in disbelief. No. His whisper barely escaped his lips. They planned this. Far away, beneath the frozen mountains of Bastion Prime, Admiral Elena Cross watched the first wave of confirmations arrive across her command screen. One after another, the galaxy's greatest military systems acknowledged Earth's temporary emergency authority, not because they had been conquered, but because the Council's own laws demanded obedience to a perfectly authenticated command. Cross looked once more at humanity's brief reply still glowing on the central display. Thank you sincerely. It had never been sarcasm. It was the most honest message humanity had ever sent. The first fleet died without a single shot being fired. Not because its crews lacked courage, and not because humanity possessed a secret superweapon capable of tearing ships apart. It happened because, in the same instant the Council's emergency protocols accepted Earth's authenticated authority, every autonomous combat system across the invasion armada obeyed its highest directive. One by one, thousands of warships disengaged their weapon locks. Planet cracker cannons folded back into dormant configurations. Missile bays sealed themselves. Shield formations dissolved into harmless fields of blue light. Across the black expanse beyond Neptune, the galaxy's greatest military force suddenly found itself surrounded by its own machines, machines that no longer recognized the Council's admirals as the highest command. Confusion spread through the armada like wildfire. Bridge officers shouted contradictory orders. Fleet commanders demanded manual overrides. Engineering teams tore open access panels, trying desperately to bypass security systems that had never failed in thousands of years. But every command returned the same cold response across every display. Authority denied. Emergency protocol active. Supreme Marshal Kareth slammed both fists against his command console as tactical symbols shifted from obedient green to controlled amber. Entire squadrons drifted helplessly through space while defensive satellites silently repositioned around them. Massive orbital cannons rotated, not toward Earth, but toward any vessel attempting to restore offensive systems by force. It was the cruelest kind of defeat. Their own technology had imprisoned them. Then humanity's hidden fleet appeared. No hyperspace flashes announced their arrival. No dramatic battle formations. Instead, dark silhouettes slowly emerged from the shadows of drifting asteroid belts, from behind frozen moons, and from gravitational blind spots surrounding the giant planets. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Sleek warships unlike anything recorded in the Council's archives glided into formation with disciplined precision, their hulls absorbing starlight until they seemed carved from the darkness itself. Their engines burned with soft blue-white light, illuminating the silent battlefield without a trace of aggression. Across alien command bridges, disbelief replaced fear. Where had they come from? How could an entire civilization conceal a fleet of this size for so long? Admiral Elena Cross stood aboard the flagship Resolute Horizon, watching the enormous tactical display expand as ship after ship reported combat readiness. Every captain awaited the same order. They possessed complete strategic control. With a single command, humanity could erase the Council's military leadership forever. The bridge remained silent. Cross looked through the panoramic observation window toward the immobilized alien armada. Behind those armored hulls were millions of living beings, soldiers who had followed orders, engineers trapped inside powerless ships, young recruits who had believed they were defending peace through overwhelming force. She knew history would remember whatever humanity chose next. A communications officer turned toward her. "Admiral, firing solutions confirmed." Another voice followed. All enemy fleets remain defenseless. The silence stretched. Then Cross spoke. "Cancel every offensive target." Several officers glanced at one another, uncertain they had heard correctly. "Deploy rescue groups." The words echoed across the bridge. Priority 1, civilian transports caught inside the engagement zone. Medical support for disabled vessels. Stabilize damaged gateways. No unnecessary casualties. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then acknowledgements flooded every console. Rescue command confirmed. Medical squadrons launching. Engineering vessels en route. Across the battlefield, human ships accelerated, not toward war, but toward salvation. Search and rescue frigates slipped between stranded Council cruisers, towing powerless vessels away from unstable gravitational distortions. Medical shuttles crossed open space to treat wounded alien crews who only hours earlier had expected to conquer Earth. Human engineers restored failing life support systems aboard enemy ships before repairing their own. Emergency supply drones distributed food, water, and reactor fuel to fleets that had arrived prepared only for destruction. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Every broadcast network carried the same impossible images. Humans pulling frightened alien children from damaged evacuation craft. Earth's doctors treating enemy officers without hesitation. Military vessels shielding refugee convoys from collapsing hyperspace corridors. Not a single act of revenge. Not a single celebration. Only discipline. Only compassion. As the last disabled warship was guided safely away from danger, Admiral Cross quietly looked toward the distant blue glow of Earth, barely visible beyond the stars. Humanity had just won the greatest military confrontation in galactic history. But its greatest victory was proving that strength was measured not by the power to destroy an enemy, but by the wisdom to spare one. The war that had never truly begun ended beneath a sky unlike any the galaxy had ever known. Weeks after the confrontation at the edge of the solar system, the vast chamber of the Galactic Council stood quieter than at any moment in its thousand-year history. The towering crystalline arches that had once reflected confidence now shimmered with solemn restraint. Representatives from hundreds of civilizations filled the circular hall, yet no voices competed for attention. No accusations echoed through the chamber. Even the translators that normally buzzed with constant conversation remained almost silent. In the center of the assembly floated a single holographic document, rotating slowly beneath a beam of pale white light. It was not a peace treaty. It was not a declaration of victory. It was the three-word message that had changed the course of civilization forever. Thank you sincerely. Future generations would study those words the way ancient humans once studied the first footprints on the moon. Not because they were poetic, but because they marked the precise moment arrogance collided with preparation, and lost. Supreme Marshal Kareth stood without his ceremonial armor for the first time in decades. The proud commander who had crossed the stars expecting another effortless conquest now looked older, quieter, humbled by truths no battlefield could teach. He replayed the events over and over in his mind. Humanity had possessed every opportunity to destroy the Council's fleets. Every tactical advantage had belonged to Earth. Yet instead of revenge, they had sent rescue ships. Instead of humiliation, they had restored stranded vessels. Instead of claiming the galaxy's military infrastructure for themselves, they had voluntarily returned every command authority the moment the crisis ended. No empire in recorded history had ever surrendered such absolute power willingly. Perhaps that, Kareth realized, was why humanity had been worthy of holding it. Far beyond the council chamber, reconstruction spread across dozens of star systems affected by the failed invasion. Human engineering vessels orbited shattered colonies, rebuilding orbital habitats piece by piece. Medical teams remained on worlds that had once prepared for war, treating civilians regardless of which flag they lived under. Cargo convoys delivered fusion reactors, atmospheric processors, and emergency food supplies without demanding payment or political concessions. Entire alien populations watched in disbelief as the civilization they had feared became the first to arrive whenever help was needed. On Earth, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Children once again filled parks beneath peaceful skies. Spaceports resumed their endless rhythm as civilian transports departed for distant colonies. Scientists returned to observatories where the stars no longer carried the shadow of imminent war. News broadcasts gradually replaced emergency briefings with stories of reconstruction, cooperation, and first contact programs that had once seemed impossible. The scars of those 72 hours would remain, but they would become reminders, not of fear, but of the choices that had defined humanity when history placed unimaginable power in its hands. Deep beneath Bastion Prime, Admiral Elena Cross walked alone through the now quiet command center. The crimson emergency lights had long since faded back to soft white. Tactical displays that once tracked invasion fleets now showed shipping lanes carrying relief supplies across the galaxy. She paused before the enormous observation window overlooking the frozen landscape outside. Endless darkness stretched toward distant stars, calm once more. She thought about the generations who had built this place in secret. The engineers who never received public recognition. The scientists who sacrificed fame to solve impossible equations. The soldiers who trained for a war they prayed would never come. None of them had prepared simply to win. They had prepared so that, if victory ever arrived, humanity would still deserve it. A quiet notification echoed through the empty chamber. The Galactic Council had unanimously approved Earth's invitation to join as an equal founding guardian of interstellar peace. Cross smiled, not with triumph, but with relief. Outside, beyond the silent rogue planet, countless stars illuminated the endless ocean of space. Somewhere among them, children from worlds that had once feared one another would grow up hearing a different story about humanity. Not as conquerors. Not as victims. But as the civilization that answered a threat with wisdom, met hatred with restraint, and proved that true strength was never measured by the enemies you could destroy. Only by the future you chose to protect. And from that day forward, a simple saying echoed from one end of the galaxy to the other. Never threaten humanity. They may thank you first, and save you afterward.